The pungent smell of disinfectant lingered in every crevice of the old oak floors at the Ashford estate. It clung to the musty scent of the frayed velvet walls, creating a heavy atmosphere that made my chest tighten with every breath. Outside, the relentless Charleston rain drummed steadily against the tin roof, sounding like skeletal fingers clawing at old memories. I stood tucked away in the narrow shadows of the doorway, half my face obscured, quietly observing the drama unfolding in the center of the living room. Under the dim, flickering light of a crystal chandelier coated in dust, the Ashford family appeared like wax figures melting under the heat of their own greed. I can't stand another week with that stench.
Clara, my wife, shrieked, her voice sharp and cruel, like metal scraping against metal. She stood there in her expensive silk pajamas, her eyes burning with disgust as she looked toward the room at the end of the hallway. My father-in-law, Conrad, slowly extinguished his cigar in a silver ashtray, the smoke drifting like lost souls with no place to go. We've already spent too much money on those useless prescriptions of hers.
His voice was deep and dull, carrying the weight of the tyranny I had been forced to obey for years. Blythe, my mother-in-law, was dabbing at her face with a monogrammed handkerchief, always ready to fake a few tears. Sutton is coming home with her high society friends. We can't have a senile old woman ruining the view for our guests. In their eyes, Grandma Rose was no longer a human being, no longer a mother or a grandmother. She was merely an overdue debt, a psychological burden they wanted to discard in a corner until her final breath. I looked toward the wheelchair in the dark corner, where Rose sat as still as a shadow. Her eyes were vacant, staring blankly at the wild garden outside, where the rose bushes had long since died. Perhaps in the foggy maze of her Alzheimer's, she was searching for something lost, a warmth her own flesh and blood had long ago abandoned. "Jack!" Conrad's shout pulled me out of my dark thoughts. "You're the most useless person in this house, so from tomorrow, bathing and cleaning up after her is your job. Don't let her show her face in front of us. Do you hear me?" I looked at him, then at Clara, the wife who once promised to build a home with me based on respect. Now she just stood there with her arms crossed in triumph, completely agreeing with the humiliation her father heaped upon me. My silence was not cowardice, it was the gathering of a storm. I walked over to Rose, and her thin, frail hands trembled slightly when I touched them. A faint scent of old lavender drifted from her white hair, a reminder of a grace that had been buried by time. "I will take care of you," I whispered, my voice low enough so that only the two of us could hear. The Ashford family burst into laughter behind me, a dry and hollow sound like coins dropping on cold ground. They thought they had won by dumping their trash on me. But they didn't know that within the shattered fragments of Rose's memory lay a secret powerful enough to burn their entire fake empire to the ground. Memories of our wedding day 3 years ago returned like sun-bleached film, leaving only a dull ache. The Ashford estate that day was magnificent, filled with white roses and perfectly tailored suits. I had believed I was the luckiest man in the world to join this historic Charleston family. But the truth quickly slapped me with the coldness of their contemptuous glares, even during the rehearsal dinner.
Conrad always introduced me to his partners as a lucky assistant, which was just a fancy way of saying gold digger. They needed someone to handle the murky financial troubles, someone to keep their mouth shut about their youngest son's massive credit card debts. And I, with my finance degree and blind enthusiasm, had unknowingly become the perfect pawn.
My life at this ranch was no different from a high-end servant, unpaid and without a voice. Every morning I woke up before the sun to check the tax books for Conrad. I had to endure Clara's baseless rages whenever she couldn't buy the latest Hermes bag. "Jack, why can't you earn more money like my friend's husband?" That question repeated like a broken record, stabbing into my self-respect in small shards. When Rose began showing clear signs of memory loss, they immediately used her as a card to humiliate me further. I was forced to move my belongings from the master bedroom to a cramped, damp little room right next to Rose's. There was only a single old bed, a rickety wooden wardrobe, and the smell of time rotting away.
Night after night, I lay there listening to her wheezing breath through the thin wall, feeling like I was being buried alive in loneliness. Clara never set foot in this area. She said the smell of old people made her nauseous. I began the routine of caring for Rose with patient silence. I bathed her with warm water infused with lavender oil, gently wiping away the stains of neglect from her skin, which was as wrinkled as parchment.
There were times when Rose looked at me with terror, mumbling names from a distant past. But there were also moments when clarity returned to her clouded eyes like a flash of lightning across a night sky. It was a night in October when the fog surrounding the ranch was so thick it blurred the line between reality and illusion. I was tucking her in when she suddenly gripped my wrist with extraordinary strength.
They're waiting for me to die, aren't they? Her voice was hoarse, but perfectly lucid, without a trace of her daily confusion. I was stunned, not knowing how to answer such a naked truth. Rose smiled faintly, a smile of bitter irony for the very children she had brought into the world. Don't be afraid, Jack. You're the only one here with human warmth left.
She pulled me close, her breath smelling of old gunpowder and damp earth, a scent from an ancient wartime. In the garden, under the old oak tree struck by lightning, the yellow fire is sleeping. It belongs to you because you didn't turn away when I began to reek. Before I could ask more, the light in her eyes faded, and she returned to the misty world of her Alzheimer's.
I sat frozen in the darkness, feeling my heart pounding wildly against the silence of the house. The Ashford family out there was still dreaming of lavish inheritances and parties at country clubs.
They didn't know that the man they treated as a slave held the key to a treasure more brilliant than all their greedy dreams. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt the gilded cage beginning to crack. Time at the Ashford Ranch passed slowly, thick like molasses forgotten in a dark cellar. Each morning began with the creak of my old wooden bed and the smell of steaming oatmeal. I learned to recognize every nuance on Rose's face, from the wrinkles relaxing in her sleep to the tension in her eyes when joint pain hit. Caring for someone with Alzheimer's is not just physical labor. It is a deep journey into patience.
I spent hours massaging her frail, pale hands, feeling the veins stand out like old tree roots clinging to life. Rose often looked at me with a lost gaze, but sometimes she would smile gently, a smile not meant for the present, but for an old friend in her memory. Meanwhile, in the lavish living room above, the Ashford family was busy with profit spreadsheets and guest lists for social events. Clara paced the wooden floors in expensive heels, the click-clack sounding like hammers pounding on my self-respect. "Jack, did she sign it today?" she asked as I walked out of Rose's room with a basin of dirty water. They were talking about the transfer deed for the entire ranch, a document Conrad had drafted to steal Rose's last piece of land. "She isn't lucid, Clara," I replied, my voice as flat as a frozen lake. Clara gave a cold snort, pulling out her monogrammed handkerchief to cover her nose as if my presence were a stain. Their contempt for me had reached a new height, where I was no longer seen as a son-in-law, but a gardener doing extra janitorial work. But they didn't know that behind my submissive exterior, I was gathering every tiny fragment of the truth. One night, under a full moon, when the mansion was deathly silent, Rose suddenly opened her eyes and called my name clearly. "Jack, take me to the garden," she said, her voice carrying the authority of a true matriarch from decades ago. I pushed her wheelchair past the withered rose bushes toward the old lightning-struck oak tree at the western edge of the ranch. The Charleston night hummed with the sound of insects and the smell of damp earth after rain, creating a haunting atmosphere. Rose pointed to a hollow in the ground covered by roots, where the weeds grew much taller than anywhere else. "Under there, Jack. The fire of the ancestors lies under there," she whispered, her eyes shining in the dark. I knelt, digging into the soft soil with my bare hands, my heart thumping as if it wanted to jump out of my chest. Deep below, beneath a layer of pebbles, I touched the lid of an ancient ceramic jar, a cold and hard sensation spreading through my fingers. I didn't open it immediately, for I knew its existence was the key to swinging open this gilded cage. The next day, I called Adeline, my best friend from college and now a prominent lawyer, known for her sharp litigation. We met at a small cafe on a street corner, where jazz music and the smell of roasted coffee helped me feel like I still belonged to the human world. Adeline looked at the documents I had secretly photographed from Conrad's office and raised her eyebrows in shock.
Jack, they don't just want the ranch. They've secretly mortgaged it to pay for Thomas's gambling debts. Rose is actually the sole creditor of this entire Ashford clan if the will is executed correctly. I told her about the jar of gold and asked her to draft a new will for Rose that very night. The will signing process took place in absolute secrecy in Rose's sick room one afternoon while the family was away at a party.
Adeline confirmed Rose's lucidity through precise psychological tests, and Rose signed her name with a trembling but determined hand. "Leave everything to the only person who bathed me." Rose smiled, a smile of sweet retribution. I kept that will in my coat pocket, feeling it as heavy as a sword ready to be drawn at any moment. The suppression of the past 3 years, Conrad's contempt, Clara's selfishness, it was all coming to a head.
The more I cared for Rose, the more I felt my soul being cleansed, detached from the filthy schemes of the Ashfords. While Conrad bragged about fake prosperity, I sat by Rose's bed, listening to her talk about the true value of this land. Rose's health began to decline rapidly, but the clarity in her final moments was a priceless gift.
She knew she was leaving, and she gave me a look of absolute trust, something I had never received from my wife. The Ashford family began hiring a cheap lawyer to pressure the hospital, urging them to move Rose to a mass care facility. They couldn't wait another day to pick apart the carcass of the ranch they thought was theirs. I watched them, from their monogrammed handkerchiefs to their expensive suits, and felt a deep pity. They were predators walking confidently into a trap they didn't know they had set for themselves. The scent of decay began to spread through the mansion, but for me, it was the scent of coming freedom. I tightened my shoelaces, preparing for my final steps on this land as a servant. For when the sun set the following day, the order of the Ashford clan would be completely overturned. The gilded cage was shaking, and the monster of greed would soon face the mirror of its own making.
Rose drew her last breath on a gray dawn, while the dew still clung to the withered rose petals outside the window. Her death happened in absolute silence, with no sobbing and no presence of her own flesh and blood. Only I sat there, holding her cold hand, feeling an invisible bond finally sever. The Ashford family organized a hasty funeral, more of a formality than an act of respect for the deceased.
They appeared in expensive black clothes, but their eyes constantly flicked to their watches, their faces showing an obvious impatience to end the sad play. "Stop wearing that pathetic face, Jack," Clara whispered through her teeth as we stood by the grave. "Her passing is a relief for all of us. You should be glad you don't have to be a room service boy anymore."
I didn't answer, only looked deep into the earth, where Rose would forever rest with her secrets. 2 hours later, the entire Ashford family gathered at Adeline's law office.
a solemn space with tall wooden bookshelves and the scent of fine leather. Conrad sat in the center, hands clasped smugly, as if he already held the keys to the ranch in his pocket.
Blythe constantly dabbed powder on her tearless face, while Thomas scrolled through his phone, likely picking out a new car for his next vacation. Adeline stepped in, her face cold and professional, like a judge preparing to pass sentence. She placed the will file on the table, the dry sound echoing in the room, so silent that Conrad's heavy breathing was audible.
Before announcing the contents of the will, I have a report on the financial status of the Ashford Ranch that needs to be confirmed. Adeline began, her voice loud and firm. In the past 3 years, Mr. Conrad has secretly mortgaged the entire farming area to guarantee loans for his private company. Currently, the ranch is on the brink of bank foreclosure, with total debts amounting to $5 million.
Conrad's face turned from a healthy flush to an ashen gray, the silver ashtray on the table suddenly looking as heavy as a lead weight. Clara jumped up, her voice high and panicked. "What? No way! Grandma had so much in savings!" Adeline smiled, a sharp smile containing deep contempt. Rose knew everything, and she used all those savings to buy back your very debts through an independent trust.
And now I shall read the final will of Rose Ashford. The entire room held its breath, the atmosphere thick with tension and the smell of collapse. I, Rose Ashford, being of sound mind, decide to leave all existing assets, including land, houses, and debt recovery rights. Adeline paused for a beat, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of the Ashford family.
To Jack, the only person who bathed me, cared for me, and gave me human warmth in my final days. Clara's scream rang out like a stuck pig. "Betrayal! This is a fraud! You pathetic gardener, you bewitched her!" Conrad lunged forward to grab the file, but Adeline quickly held it up. "Don't move, Mr. Conrad." My voice rang out, for the first time in 3 years carrying the power of ultimate judgment. I have full video and audio recordings confirming Rose's lucidity when she signed this will, witnessed by medical experts. You planned all of this?" Conrad growled, his face distorted with rage and fear. I looked him straight in the eye, feeling an immense relief as their masks completely shattered. "I didn't plan for your greed, Conrad. You destroyed everything yourselves with your own cruelty."
Rose also left a special inheritance for you all. Adeline pulled out a thick stack of invoices. These are all the debts you've incurred. Jack is now your legal creditor. If not paid within 30 days, the Ashford mansion will be auctioned to recover the funds. Blythe fainted on the spot, her monogrammed handkerchief falling to the dirty floor of truth.
I stood up, adjusted my collar, and felt the chill of freedom flowing through my veins. "Your time is up," I said, as calmly as Rose had instructed me that night. I turned and walked away, not bothering to look back at the people wailing in the ruins of their lies. Outside the office, the Charleston sun broke out brilliantly, lighting the path back toward the old ranch.
Under the old lightning-struck oak tree, the yellow fire was still waiting for me to wake a new future. The monster had been swallowed by its own greed, and I, finally, was completely, truly free from this rotten, gilded cage.
I stood on the balcony of the main house at the Ashford Ranch, watching the last moving trucks carrying the in-laws' belongings leave the main gate. The engine sound faded, leaving a peaceful silence that this land had not tasted in decades. The wind from Charleston blew in, carrying the salt of the sea and the scent of new rosebuds starting to revive under the care of true gardeners.
In my hand was the finalized divorce decree, a final symbol of the severing of ties with a toxic past. Clara had tried to call me dozens of times, her messages initially full of curses, then slowly turning into pleas, and finally the manipulation of marital affection. "Jack, you can't leave me on the street with empty hands like this. We used to have beautiful memories." I read that message and only felt a strange emptiness.
The only beautiful memory I have here is the hours sitting by Rose's bed, hearing her talk about kindness and resilience. I used part of the gold found under the old oak tree to pay off all the ranch's debts and turn this place into the Rose Ashford Nature Reserve. The remaining gold I used to establish a welfare fund specializing in supporting the elderly and those with Alzheimer's in Charleston.
I wanted her name not to be associated with the family's greed, but with the salvation of those in similar circumstances. Conrad and Blythe now have to rent a small apartment in the suburbs, living on a meager allowance and the charity of old acquaintances they once looked down upon. Thomas is facing investigations into financial fraud. No more luxury cars or parties through the night.
They lost everything because they never truly possessed anything besides bottomless greed. I walked down to the garden, toward the lightning-struck oak tree, where a small marble plaque had now been placed. "You can rest now, ma'am," I whispered into the air, feeling a light electric current run through my heart. I was no longer Jack, the despised son-in-law, the submissive Ashford room boy. I was a free man, possessing the greatest asset a human can have, peace of mind. The sunset fell, dyeing the cotton fields a brilliant red, creating a magnificent and grand scene. I took a deep breath, feeling my lungs full of life and independence. The monster of manipulation had completely disappeared from my life. The gilded cage had swung open long ago, and I was finally, completely, truly free.